everyone, and welcome to Confirmit's Summer of Analytics webinar series, Diving Deeper and Predicting the Future. I'd like to introduce today's presenters, Tim Bacher, Director, Customer Experience Management, and Holly DeMuro, Product Marketing Manager here at Confirmit. A recorded version of this webinar will be made available shortly after the session, and I take this opportunity to remind you to please send in any questions you may have using the chat box. Tim and Holly will be answering your questions at the end of the webinar. I will now hand it over to Holly, who will take you through CX Analytics in the next half an hour. Over to you, Holly.
Thank you so much, and thanks everybody for joining us today. We're really excited about this. So CX Analytics, it's a really big topic. I'm sure you guessed that, and we're only here for half an hour today. So we're going to be kind of high level on certain things, but we're going to give you a really good taste of what CX Analytics are available to you and what you can do with them and how they can help to improve your business. Beyond that, we'll be following up the webinar with some printed material, an ebook that'll go into a little bit more detail about analytics as well, so you have something tangible to walk away with. But do feel free, as Malkat had said before, do ask us any questions that you've got, and we'll try to get to all those in the process of the presentation. So analytics, what is it? Ultimately, analytics, the actual textbook definition, is the systematic computational analysis of data. That sounds really, really scary, but it's really not. Ultimately, all it means is that it's a variety of methods for analyzing data for a specific purpose. And what's that purpose? It's to tell a story. Your data tells a story. And what we want to do is unlock that story by finding the story hidden in all of those fancy numbers and fancy math that we're going to go into in more detail. For the purpose of this webinar and our conversations, we're going to divide analytics into three categories. Okay, we're going to talk about basic analytics, advanced analytics, and predictive analytics. Now, when we talk about this, again, this is a story. So when we're saying basic analytics, we're going to define that as the analytics that help you determine what happened. Now, again, continuing with the story theme, advanced analytics, why did it happen? How can we do it better? And once we get into predictive, you take that story to a new level where you start talking about what's next? Where are we going from here? Now, of course, any good topic when we're talking about analytics has to start with data. And obviously, today's webinar is not going to go into tremendous amounts of information about data, but it is a really important piece. So it all starts with good data. Now, the data that we're going to be using for any type of analytics, whether it's your basic, advanced, or predictive, is coming from a variety of sources and through a variety of channels. Now, which ones? Well, that depends. The most powerful analytics really do hinge on having the right combination of multi-source, multi-channel information coming from new places, feedback that you're getting from your customers, historic information that you have in various systems in your company today, and new information that you're pulling from other sources as well. So it's really important to have a good combination of data. And no, there's no golden rule. There's no one size fits all as far as data goes. It really does depend on what you're trying to accomplish and what you're looking for. But the key really is to be sure that you're gathering the right information to feed what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to discover, and making sure that you have a sufficient amount of contextual data as well. It's not just about feedback. It's not just about your NPS score. It's not just about those individual one-off elements that don't give you a whole picture or a whole story. When we're talking about analytics, again, we're talking about storytelling. But data also isn't just the basic information that you've got from these sources and these channels. Data actually goes further, because when we start to dive in, you've got your structured data and you've got unstructured data. Now, your structured data, if you kind of envision most of the business systems you're using today, or maybe even a survey where you're entering in one specific piece of information into a dedicated field. That's very structured. It's very easy to report on. It's very easy to gather the information from and quantify and qualify. And again, you'll see it in your survey questions, demographic information, financial information, sometimes your product information and what people are using. But on the other side of the story, you've got unstructured data. And unstructured data is things that, again, just don't have a structure. So verbatims, things that people are, when you're giving them that text box in a survey, tell us what your thoughts were on this situation, and they're writing you that open paragraph. There's no structure to it. your CRM notes, emails, things that are out and about on social media. These are all your unstructured data. And now it is, in many cases, unstructured data can look a little intimidating because it's big and it's unstructured and it's kind of seemingly messy, but it's usable. And actually, you'll find when you put the structured data together with unstructured data and you pull all that information together, you're able to get deeper and bigger insights because you really can dive into the mind of the consumer or mind of your customer in a much richer, much broader way. Now, the key to all this, of course, is to be able to pull all this information. And I told you I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on data because we want to really dive into the analytics. But with that sort of stage set, what we're doing now is we're taking all of that data from all those sources, all those channels, both structured and unstructured. We want to grab all that data. And then, as you see in the little diagram here, we want to kind of pull it together and do something with it. We want to analyze it as if it were a single data set for all intent and purpose and look and see what story we can pull out. Now, the interesting piece and how we're going to end today's webinar after we go through the analytics piece is we're going to start to talk about how that information, the insights that you've discovered in the process of analysis, how that's being delivered to the necessary people. Obviously, you don't pull data just to sit on it, right? No, you don't look for insights and look for that data story for no purpose. The purpose is to share the story like any other book that you've ever read. And we want to be sure that we're sharing that story in the appropriate manner, but of course using that same data and using these same analytic techniques. So now that I've kind of set the stage a little bit, I want to pass it off to my partner in crime here, Tim, who's going to go with us and explore what these analytics are. Tim?
Great, thanks, Holly. So as Holly mentioned, basic analytics starts with what happened. So I've just got a dashboard view, which just gives you a bit of a summary level view of customers' data. So we've got a key metric that the organization is using, which is repurchase index. We've got a trend chart, which shows how that metric's been varying over time, plus a couple of other metrics from their surveys, overall satisfaction and recommend the organization. And then below that, we've got some more detailed information that they can drill down into. Now that gives us a starting point, but clearly we want to go a lot further than that. And basically a general theme of carrying out analysis and analytics is what's causing the results that I can see, and what action can I take to address any issues that are apparent in that data. So let's start to look at this in the next slide. So here we've got a scenario where we've got a contact center manager who's managing a series of contact centers, all UK based in this particular scenario. Customers will dial into the contact center, they'll speak to an agent, and then after the interaction they'll fill in a survey. The survey's got a series of questions in it, 7 in total, overall satisfaction with the call, and then a series of questions about different elements of that call experience. So the chart at the top gives us a summary of that information. So there's one bar there for each of those questions in the survey. And so the first thing we do as the analytical approach is just to see what looks interesting about that chart. And I know you can't answer me, so I'll just tell you that I think the thing that's of interest is that bar there, which is one of the questions in the survey. And so we can drill into that bar and try and find out what's causing those results. So basically we've got lower green, which means we've got fewer of the better responses, a bit more red, which shows we've got a few more negative responses, and then also a higher amount of yellow. So let's try and work out what's causing that. So then we go down to the chart table below. Basically what we can see from the looking at that question in the table is we can see that the Bristol contact centre showing in pink there has the lowest score for that particular metric. And so we want to then drill down a bit further into the data. Do that. So we open up the Bristol contact centre and we see there's 5 teams in the centre. And so we look to see the scores of the different teams. These are scores out of 10, I should add. and we can see that team 1 seems to have a pretty low score, but also team 4 is probably not much higher. But initially, let's have a look at team 1. So what we can see there is that agent 8 has a particularly low score, 2.5 or so. And so clearly there's a bit of an issue with the way in which agent 8 is handling the calls. And that's probably as far as we can get with the survey data, the numbers side of the survey data. So, but then we also want to find out what can we do about this particular issue. So at that stage, we then start to look at the comments that have been made by customers in the survey about that agent. So it may be something with the agent's empathy or some other aspect of the way in which they're handling the calls, which we need to address. But we also see on that same line for agent 8 that his or her score for overall satisfaction with the call is actually quite high. It's higher than average for the contact centers. There's no particular attitude issue, it would appear. It's just some kind of retraining that's required. And so that's the basic analytical process. We've drilled down into the data, trying to seek out what's causing the problem we saw at the top level, and then digging into the customer comments, where we have to use a bit of judgment to understand what we can do to address the problem. Okay. So that's basic analytics. I'm now moving on to more advanced analytics, and we're showing a few statistical methods on the screen here. We don't unfortunately have time to go through all of them, but I'll pick out just a couple to give you a bit more detail. So the first of these I'm going to cover is correlation, and here we've got a key drivers chart. Many of you, I guess, will have probably seen these charts. But basically, the basic method here is that we're looking at the same data we've got from our contact center survey we were looking at a minute ago. And you can see that the cared about your query has that 6.4 out of 10 score for satisfaction on the chart there. And then the other questions in the survey are on the right-hand side with more similar satisfaction scores to each other. The vertical axis is the key one here, so that's where we're using the correlation. And in this case, it's correlation with the overall satisfaction with the call. So that's ultimately what we're trying to improve, the overall experience. And each of these questions that are shown on the chart here pick up different elements of the call experience. So what the correlation does is it basically says which of those elements of the call experience has most influence over overall satisfaction with the call, which in this case is did everything to help. So when that goes up, you'll tend to get overall satisfaction with the call going up. But what this does is give you guidance as to what action to take with the data. In this case, you'd want to address that issue we were talking about earlier with agent 8, and it seems to be a more general problem across the whole of the contact center group. Okay, I'm going to move on to my second area where I'm just going to very quickly pick up on text analytics, an area that's particularly of interest in advanced analytics at the moment. We do have a separate webinar on that that's already taken place, so you can get to that through our website. But so I'll very briefly cover that here. So what's text analytics for? Well, basically, remember as we were going through the drill down through the dashboards earlier, we got to a point where we decided we need to use judgment, read the text comments that have been left by different customers who'd answered the survey. And what text analytics does is it kind of automates and makes that process much easier, that bit of analyzing and working out what is being written or said by the customers. So it gives you an analytical view of that sort of level of detail. So two advantages of that: it takes the legwork out of it, so it automates it, so you don't have somebody having to read all this stuff. But also it gives you consistency of the analysis. So if I read 50 comments about agent 8, I'd probably come to one conclusion. And if Holly read those same 50 comments, she might come to a different conclusion. So what text analytics does is it gives you a consistent view of that information. In terms of how it works, it basically has two elements to it. First of all, it works out what the comment that's been written is about, and then secondly, it works out whether it's a positive or negative comment that's been made. In terms of using it, it's the analytical method as previously. So in this particular chart, we've got a series of different data sets, but a series of categories talking about what the data is about, what the customer feedback is about. And the one I've picked out there is under services. So within services, there's a category for parking. So that's people who've talked about parking in their feedback. And this has a proportionately higher level of negative comments, so negative sentiment. And then we can drill down further into that and look at the detail of what's causing it. So I've picked out a few of the comments here that relate to parking. Hopefully you can see those. But basically we've got two smiley faces or frowning faces on each of those lines. And the reason for that is we're showing the contrast between overall sentiment for the comment, whether that's positive or negative, but also the sentiment in relation to the parking. Because clearly in some of those comments, so the second one down and the second to last one, we've got comments that cover more than one issue, and overall the comment is positive, but the parking is mentioned in a negative context. So you get that contrast from the text analytics. So very useful technique. Okay. So now we finally going to move on to predictive analytics. The difference here is we're creating a predictive model, so we can predict something in the future or some change based on inputs we might provide into the model. So we can also test, do what-if planning, and help us with our decision making using our historical data. So in this area, the technique which I've used most throughout my career is regression analysis. Particularly useful technique in its own right, but it's also a technique which underpins many other statistical methods, even that don't have regression mentioned in their title. So it's a very useful methodology to know something about. And so I'm just going to give you a very brief overview about what it is. So it establishes the relationship between two variables or two survey questions, but it can apply to all sorts of, to anything really, not just surveys and so forth. So the trivial example I'm showing here is just, let's think about selling ice creams in the summer. Typically, we would expect to sell more ice creams when the weather's warmer. So let's look at a theoretical data set here. Typical London summer temperatures ranging from, what's that, 16 degrees centigrade to 26. Apologies to those of you who are more familiar with Fahrenheit, but I think 21 degrees is 70 Fahrenheit. So probably a bit on the chilly side. So we plot this data of number of ice creams sold against temperature. What regression does is it will fit the best line it can through those data points. So it gives you the predictive model. And the way in which you use that, very simplistically, is if you knew tomorrow's temperature based on the forecast was going to be 25 degrees, you know the model is going to tell you you're going to sell about 210 ice creams out of your ice cream van. But also we can see there's variability around the line. So if all the points are on the line, that would be an extremely accurate forecast or prediction. But because there's variability around the line in the data, we can also use regression to give us a range of values. So the regression analysis also says, well, in this case, our range of values is something between 190 and 230, let's say, ice creams. So it gives you that as a regression. And the last thing it does, which is very useful, is it tells you whether or not there's a relationship at all. So that falls out of the statistics too, which is also particularly useful. So that's regression analysis. Let's just now very quickly give you an example of how I've used it in the past. So I used to work for British Airways, the customer insight manager, managing their customer feedback survey program for a few years. One of the challenges I had in that role was to set customer satisfaction targets with around the business with line managers for different elements of the customer experience. And I had a particular problem with the guy who ran Heathrow Airport, very senior director, and he said, I have lots of operational targets, Tim, and I don't really want to have, on top of that, a customer target. So the way in which I managed to get around that problem or solve that problem was to use regression analysis and basically look at the operational data and how that compared to the customer data in a sort of regression analysis. And the operational metrics were, so the example here is baggage reclaim. The operational metric was first bag onto the reclaim unit, number of minutes after the airplane parked on stand. And then clearly we had also in our data set the satisfaction with baggage reclaim performance. And so those correlated pretty well. And so what we're able to do was therefore translate the operational targets that my colleague was using into a customer target, so tick that box. But also the added advantage of it, and this is where I think it's particularly relevant to many of you, where you probably come across this scenario of people with operational targets, but you've got your customer hat on, is it enable us to have that dialogue between what should the operational target be, because we then had the regression analysis that told us how they translated between customer satisfaction and operational performance. And so that as an approach is very useful across industries that have that problem of operational and customer. That's one example. And I think my final slide is to do with a what-if model. So again, this is underpinned in part by regression analysis that sits behind this what-if model. But in this particular case, we're just looking at 3 metrics here. So from our survey, so associate availability, product stock, and checkout wait time. And we've got a score for those metrics from our surveys. And then if you look across to the column that says target increase, so we have 5% in each of the boxes there. So basically the way this model, what-if model is set up is if you vary that percentage, the model will tell you what the increase in your NPS score will be for that percentage increase in the attribute score. So if associate availability, which is currently, it's quite hard to read on my screen, but it's at 67, I think. If that goes up by 5%, we're going to get a 1.6 increase in NPS. So that's based on a regression model between similar to the one we've just looked at. And then we also have another model sitting behind it which translates that into an increase in revenue for the organization. And so what a tool like this allows you to do is to do some bit of scenario planning. Where do you need to invest the most? Which aspects of the customer experience do you invest in most to get an improvement in revenue for the organization as a whole? Clearly, there's a lot of analytics needs to be carried out using historical data to come up with a model, but this is the way in which you would usefully use the model and present it to decision makers and other users. Okay, that's a pretty quick canter through analytics. We've touched on a number of areas very briefly, clearly in our 30 minutes, but I'm now going to hand back to Holly just to round off the presentation. Over to you, Holly.
Thank you, Tim. So thank you for going through all that. It was fabulous information. But what I want to talk about for 1 second, I accidentally skipped a slide there, sorry. Just in closing, we had started out talking about how you need to gather that data and now you need to analyze it. And Tim went through some of the scenarios on how you can apply different types of analysis, whether it's your basic, your advanced, or your predictive. But then you have to share it, right? key piece to all this is making sure that people have the insights that you've discovered. You find things like what Tim mentioned with the predictive model, where you've got the opportunity to show a correlation, or obviously using regression, but show a connection between baggage reclaim time and people's satisfaction, or make predictions about the future in terms of how much ice cream is going to sell. So you've got all that, but unless you share it, it's not doing any good. But the other piece to consider is that it's not good enough just to share a standard story, because different people in your organization have different needs, they have different wants, and that clearly with that they have different areas of interest in the organization and they need different information. Now that doesn't mean going off and collecting 900 different data sets and hoping for the best. Oftentimes you can do it all with the same data set. It's just a matter of tailoring how you're delivering that information. And that's where we get into dashboards. Dashboards are a really great way to do that, because you can tailor and deliver the same kind of data tweaked according to what people need to see in a way that's easy for them to see it. So Tim went through a lot of stuff, and there were some fancy words thrown out there, correlation, regression, and that's kind of scary. But when you put it into a nice, neat, storyified picture on a dashboard like this, where it's clear, it jumps off the page what you need to look at and how you need to look at it, the story becomes really evident. So if we look at this dashboard, this happens to be a dashboard tailored to executives, for example. It's high level, jumps right to the top. So we've got the NPS. It's bad. It's highlighted in red. Where is the problem? Well, I can look down at the regional performance, or I can even look at an NPS map. So it answers those questions right away, guides you through the story. Well, what is the problem? Well, clearly I need to focus on associate availability. Now I want to learn a little bit more about what the customers are saying. Words right out of their mouth. Let's look at those customer comments. A great high-level, quick, one-and-done overview for an executive. But again, different people in the organization need different information. So you've got something similar then available to sales and account managers, where they want to know about the NPS, but they only want to know about their portfolio. They want to know what's most important to them. And this is, again, specifically tailored to what they need to know. Where are the problems that I need to address? Next, revenue at risk. How is this going to impact my pocketbook? How is this going to really impact what I have control over? And of course, it can continue through anyone else in the organization as well. Others, store branch managers, regional managers, etc., where again it's tailored specifically to what they have some control over. And again, I can't say it enough, there's nothing more important through the analytics process, the data gathering process, than sharing this information out with other people. If you're not sharing it, it can't be acted on. So this is extremely important, because the actions that you take from this information is where the return on investment comes in for your voice of the customer or customer experience program. And that's ultimately what we really all need. So with that, I think we're coming up on our half an hour. If you haven't yet, do submit your questions. And if we have some already, Malkit, maybe you can pass those over to us.
Thank you, Holly, and thank you, Tim. That was very, very insightful. We've had many questions come through, so thank you, audience, for sending that across. So the first question that I have for you guys is, how do you suggest you unify the structured and unstructured data? Holly, would you be able to help us with that question?
Sure. So ultimately, Tim kind of brushed upon it a little bit in his part of the presentation. We do have a dedicated presentation to text analytics, but that's the key, text analytics. So ultimately, unstructured data is coming through massive paragraphs or whatever the person is writing. And text analytics obviously is a technology that is able to structure that unstructured information. So for example, Confirmit Genius is our product, and what it does is it takes the unstructured data and it puts it into structure by categorizing it and assessing the sentiment. So it's putting it into categories that are meaningful to your organization. So if you're, say, a retail shop, you might have things like, store hours. Those are your categories. Store hours, associate availability was one I showed in the screenshot I had before. It might be cleanliness of the parking lot, cleanliness of the bathrooms. Whatever your categories are that are appropriate to your organization, it helps to figure out in an automated automated fashion how to categorize those, but then also measures in a sort of a secondary measurement within those categories, within those areas of interest for you, your store cleanliness or your parking availability or whatever it is. How do people feel about it? Are they happy? Are they sad? So ultimately, it's doing that, again, in an automated fashion to create structure in the unstructured data in an automated fashion. So you can ultimately scrub and scrape tons and tons and tons of verbatims and unstructured data that you're getting either from, again, verbatims, or if you want to pull it off of social media, we have companies who are doing that, so that they can get a really good feel on what people are saying in mass. I will add in too, and I know we're running close to time, but I'll just throw a quickie in here. Time and again, we hear from some people that they find that some of their verbatims are not as robust as they might hope, so they're not sure that they're going to get the quality of information that they would hope for. And there is a solution to that too. There's a little tool that we have, for example. We call it dynamic open text. So it basically kind of prompts the customer or the consumer, whoever's answering the question, if they're answering, for example, a survey question, it prompts them to add more information. It's kind of smart. So it would read, and if the person is, they're typing and they put in, say, 50 characters, they'll have a status bar that says, oh, you've done pretty good, but could you do a little more? But at the same time of that analysis of the quantity that they're putting in, it also analyzes the quality that they're putting in by looking at the specific words and asking follow-up questions. So, for example, they might say, the store was clean, but the staff was a little bit not so great. And it'll ask them a follow-up question. Well, what do you mean? What was wrong with the staff, or something along those lines to kind of beef up those answers as well. And again, that gives you a really powerful setting to be able to once again structure that unstructured data according to categories that make sense to you, and then analyze the sentiment behind them. So that was a truly fabulous question. Thank you for asking. Malka, do we have anything else?
Yes, we do indeed. We are coming tight to time, but there's one more question that we can quickly answer. How can we encourage respondents to provide detailed and thorough open text answers to support the best text analytics insights possible?
Well, I think that's I kind of covered that in the last question. Again, there's for us, we've got that dynamic open text question that I described a minute ago, and if I don't know if maybe that question came in before I'd mentioned it, but if you need more information about it, I can absolutely provide some. Just ping us either through the chat box, or you see the contact information on the screen, and we'll be in contact after the webinar as well. To send you that follow-up information I'd mentioned, as well as the slides and a copy of the video of the presentation today. Anything else?
That's it. We've got a few more questions, but our team is going to reach out to everybody and give them an answer to their questions. Thank you, Holly, and thank you, Tim. Thank you to the audience as well for attending today's webinar. Just a quick reminder, we will be following up with the recorded webinar and be in touch with you if your questions were not answered in this webinar today. Thank you once again, and have a great day ahead.
Thanks, everybody.